In December of 1988, the Walt Disney Company announced plans to form a film production label entitled Hollywood Pictures. The new division would be the company's third film label, alongside its flagship Walt Disney Pictures and Touchstone Pictures, which had been founded several years earlier to release adult and teen-oriented films. The growing company's goal was for Hollywood Pictures to release general appeal films similar to those released by Touchstone, low to mid-budget movies that could expand the studio's reach beyond the family films that Walt Disney Pictures produced. The studio had been founded in 1923 as Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio by Walt and Roy Disney, who initially produced animated shorts exclusively. The company was renamed Walt Disney Productions in 1929 and moved into feature film production in the 1930s, releasing a string of animated films before moving into live-action production in the 40s and 50s. The early films of Walt Disney Productions were distributed by third-party companies, as the studio had teamed with RKO Pictures and United Artists to release their films. But in 1953, the Disney Brothers formed their own distribution company, Buena Vista, as a way of releasing and promoting their films in-house. The studio achieved massive success over the decades with animated and live-action films alike, but by the late 1970s, Walt Disney Productions was faltering. The death of its two founders had led to an identity crisis within the company, and the studio found diminishing returns with its family-friendly releases. The viewing public had largely pigeonholed the studio as being for kids only, so to break out of this image, Disney released a series of films in the early 1980s which attempted to draw in teens and adults. Most of these films flopped majorly, and the company was at risk of a hostile takeover when it founded Touchstone Films in 1984. This new division would release films for the teen and adult markets, which would allow the newly renamed Walt Disney Pictures division to focus solely on family films. Touchstone's first release, Splash, was a big hit, and after the company's CEO Ron Miller was forced out in 1984, management brought in Michael Eisner as the Disney Company's new CEO. Warner Brothers executive Frank Wells was appointed as the company's president, and Eisner brought in Jeffrey Katzenberg from Paramount to serve as the studio's chairman. This new regime secured hundreds of millions of dollars in financing from a partnership with an entity called Silver Screen Partners, which Disney utilized to fund Touchstone's production slate. Through its adult-oriented releases, Disney was resurrected from the brink of disaster, repositioning itself as a top film studio. The Touchstone releases of Three Men and a Baby, Good Morning Vietnam, and Cocktail all grossed over $100 million, while Who Framed Roger Rabbit surpassed $350 million worldwide. Live-action films were now the bedrock of the Disney Company, and the film industry overall was experiencing a boom, with a number of new independent film companies rising to prominence. As the supply of movies increased, multiplex-style movie theaters grew in popularity. While multi-screen theaters were not a new concept, the mid to late 80s saw an explosion of multiplex theaters containing upwards of 12 to 24 screens, which inundated malls and shopping centers across America. But around 1988, after years of growth, film production had peaked and begun to recede. Several prominent indie studios had shut down due to financial issues, with others facing bankruptcy. With this large ecosystem of multiplex theaters in place, a shortage of films was expected soon, and Disney executives saw an opportunity to build the company by upping film production to fill the void. Disney was also experiencing some internal struggles between high-level executives. Ricardo Mestres had worked with Jeffrey Katzenberg as a development executive at Paramount Studios, before being recruited to join Walt Disney Studios in 1984 as vice president of production. A year later, Mestres was assigned to Touchstone Pictures under Touchstone's president David Hoberman. While the two oversaw monumental growth for the studio, with Touchstone churning out hits left and right, it was reported that the two executives had developed a rivalry, and this conflict, along with Disney's desire to amp up film production, led Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg to create a third film studio for Mestres to head. In late 1988, Disney publicly announced the creation of its third distribution label, Hollywood Pictures. The name dates back to the early 1980s, when Eisner, then the president of Paramount Pictures, had floated the idea of buying the film company American International Pictures and rebranding it as Hollywood Pictures. This plan never came to fruition, but the name clearly stuck with Eisner, who had also considered renaming Touchstone as Hollywood Pictures before the label became its own entity. Disney's Hollywood Pictures would release films similar to those from Touchstone, low to mid-budget adult-oriented fare that was unfit for a Walt Disney Pictures release. Disney's goal was to have Hollywood Pictures release 12 films per year, with all of their films being released through Disney's in-house distributor Buena Vista. And because the company would be funding the new label through the investment secured from Silver Screen Partners, Disney was in the rare position of being able to make a high number of films without risking their own money. Ricardo Mestres was given $100 million to fund Hollywood Pictures' production slate, and was tasked with the lofty assignment of duplicating Touchstone's success. Hollywood Pictures' first release would be Arachnophobia in the summer of 1990, a horror comedy that the studio described as a thrill-a-romedy. The film was highly anticipated, with Variety predicting that Arachnophobia would be one of the summer's top-grossing films. And Disney was also sharing in that enthusiasm, with Mestres saying, "Obviously, we want to get off to a great start." Even rival studios were feeling intimidated by the film's release, with Paramount Pictures reportedly moving up the release date for their film Ghost to avoid competing with Arachnophobia. Ultimately, amidst all this pressure to succeed, Hollywood Pictures' debut feature would do respectable numbers, grossing $53 million on a $25 million budget. But the film failed to match the grandiose expectations put upon it by Disney and the press, as the company had been counting on it to be a huge blockbuster hit. Ironically, Paramount's Ghost would become a smash hit, earning over $500 million worldwide, nearly 10 times what Arachnophobia had grossed. Hollywood Pictures' next release, a comedy entitled Taking Care of Business starring Jim Belushi and Charles Grodin, failed to make an impact, grossing less than half of what Arachnophobia did. The label was off to an iffy start, and while Disney became the top-grossing studio in 1990 thanks to the massive success of Touchstone's Pretty Woman, internal worries were stirring. One of Disney's highest-profile releases of 1990, Touchstone's Dick Tracy, had cost the studio a whopping $46 million to produce, along with $54 million in marketing costs. While the film grossed over $100 million, the studio saw little return on their investment due to the film's bloated costs. Disney had hoped to turn Dick Tracy into a franchise like Indiana Jones. But the film was a disappointment, and in January of 1991, studio chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg sent out a 28-page internal memo in which he warned against what he called the blockbuster mentality, urging the studio not to rely on high-cost, high-risk projects. Though 1990 had been a disappointing box office year for all film studios in Hollywood, 1991 would see the stakes rise as studios upped the number of films scheduled for release. Film distribution was becoming an international industry, and with revenue from foreign markets growing, studios could produce more films with less risk. While 143 films were released overall in 1990, 180 films were scheduled for 1991. The downside of this was that increased competition was driving up the cost of marketing and making it harder for studios to secure spots in theaters. 1991 would be Hollywood Pictures' first full year in operation, as the label slated 4 films with recognizable stars for release. Run was an action thriller starring Patrick Dempsey, while The Marrying Man was a romantic comedy starring Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger. One Good Cop was a crime drama starring Michael Keaton, and V.I. Warshawski was an action comedy starring Kathleen Turner as a private eye. With this mix of genres and big-name actors, Disney hoped to draw in adult moviegoers and establish a brand known for producing high-concept, quality films on modest budgets. Unfortunately, the films released by Hollywood Pictures in 1991 couldn't match the competition, with all 4 of them flopping. But it wasn't just Disney taking a hit. Amidst a crowded marketplace, ticket sales for films overall fell by 4% in 1991, as budgets soared due to rising star salaries. Despite its failure to launch in 1991, Disney continued with its plan for Hollywood Pictures, upping the ante to release 10 films in 1992. First up in January of that year was The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, a psychological thriller which Disney expected to be the breakout hit that their struggling label needed. The company's estimation was correct, with the film debuting at number 1 at the box office and staying there for 4 consecutive weekends. In its 5th week of release, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle would be dethroned from the number 1 spot by Hollywood Pictures' next release, Medicine Man starring Sean Connery and Lorraine Bracco. Disney was riding high on all of this success, and by February of 1992, the company had 4 films in the top 10 at the box office. Cradle, which was produced for a modest $12 million, would end up becoming one of the year's most profitable films, grossing $140 million worldwide and becoming a top rental on home video. But Hollywood Pictures still had a rocky road ahead of it, as it released 8 more films in 1992 to mixed results. The most notable of these releases was Encino Man, a comedy starring Brendan Fraser as a caveman who is frozen and de-thawed in modern-day Los Angeles. The movie, which would launch the film career of comedian Pauly Shore, did well at the box office, grossing $40 million on a low $7 million budget. Another film released that year was The Distinguished Gentleman, a political comedy starring Eddie Murphy. Made for a staggering $50 million, likely due to a high salary for Murphy, the film grossed $86 million but received negative reviews, failing to achieve the success of Murphy's previous films. Hollywood Pictures released 6 other films in 1992, all of which flopped. But the label had achieved enough success to justify continued growth, with 11 films being scheduled for 1993. The most prominent of these films was Super Mario Bros., based on the immensely popular Nintendo video game series. The film was the second collaboration between Hollywood Pictures and Synergy Pictures, an independent production company founded in the late 1980s by producer Andrew Vajna. Vajna had previously founded Carol Co. Pictures, which was best known for producing the Rambo series. But Vajna had left the company in 1989 to form Synergy, which had made a deal with Disney to distribute several of its films per year, starting with Medicine Man. Super Mario Bros. Would be the highest profile release by Hollywood Pictures to date, and the first based on an existing franchise, with a budget of around $45 million. While the film had hoped to capitalize on the audience of the video game, it was a critical and commercial disaster, grossing only $38 million and being panned by reviewers and fans alike. Most of Hollywood Pictures' other films from 1993 were flops as well, aside from Pauly Shore's second film, Son-in-Law, which posted moderately successful numbers. Toward the end of the year, the studio experienced a slight rebound with the release of The Joy Luck Club. Based on the Amy Tan novel of the same name, the drama was one of the first American productions to feature an all-Asian cast, and Disney reportedly gave the filmmakers full creative control over the film, as it was just the kind of unique, lower-budget project that Hollywood Pictures was looking for. The film received positive reviews and performed moderately at the box office, grossing $32 million on a $10 million budget. But given all of its flops, Hollywood Pictures desperately needed more big hits to stay afloat. December's release of Tombstone, which was co-produced by Synergy, came after a wave of successful modern westerns. The film did fairly well at the box office but failed to cross the $100 million mark. And 1994 would be a particularly rough year for Hollywood Pictures, as its first 3 releases of the year bombed. In April of 1994, Ricardo Mestres abruptly stepped down as the head of Hollywood Pictures. While Mestres had overseen several hit films, the studio's overall approach of producing high-concept films on modest budgets was clearly not working. Mestres shifted to working as a film producer for Disney, and a new president named Michael Linton was appointed to head Hollywood Pictures. Linton had never worked in the film industry, but had come out of the literary world, working as an executive for Disney's publishing wing. Linton promised to steer the studio away from lower-budget comedies and produce high-quality mainstream films in a variety of genres. While the rest of Hollywood Pictures' offerings in 1994 were mostly duds, one film in particular offered a glimmer of hope for the future. Quiz Show, directed by Robert Redford, was a historical drama based on the real-life quiz show scandals of the 1950s, in which game show producers were caught rigging the outcomes of their programs. The film performed modestly at the box office, but was a critical sensation, earning 4 Academy Award nominations, including the first Best Picture nomination for Hollywood Pictures. While this was a notable achievement, Hollywood Pictures couldn't survive on Oscar nominations alone. If the division was to continue, it would need to produce big hit films, and fast. Today's video is brought to you by Leaps and Rebounds, the company providing you with high-quality trampolines for all of your workout needs. Whether you're looking to improve balance and circulation, increase strength, or simply tone up, Leaps and Rebounds has you covered. Each trampoline is lightweight and easy to transport and includes a lifetime warranty. Plus, their website features dozens of free workouts to get you started, and if it's not for you, return it within 30 days for a full refund risk-free. Working out should be fun, so take the leap towards better health today and order your very own fitness trampoline from Leaps and Rebounds. Use promo code Serfer10 at the checkout for 10% off your order, or simply click the link in the description. Despite Hollywood Pictures lagging, Disney overall had soared in 1994, with the studio becoming the first in history to earn $1 billion at the box office in one single year. But 1994 was also a year of big shakeups at the company. Company president Frank Wells died in a helicopter crash in April of 1994, and shortly thereafter, Disney Studios chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg left the company after he wasn't promoted to Wells's position. Katzenberg was replaced by executive Joe Roth, who had previously run Disney's subsidiary production house Caravan Pictures. Amidst all of this chaos, it was uncertain if Hollywood Pictures could continue. The label had only produced one breakout hit in 4 years, despite pulling out all the stops. While the division had developed and produced The Santa Claus for Tim Allen, Walt Disney Pictures had taken the reins to release the film. The movie was a smash hit, earning $190 million worldwide. And while Hollywood Pictures wasn't technically able to bask in this success, it was a positive sign that the division was capable of developing and producing more hits. 1995 would be the year that Hollywood Pictures finally broke out. In April, the label released the romantic comedy While You Were Sleeping, starring Sandra Bullock and Bill Pullman. While the film had cost $16 million to produce, it wound up grossing $182 million worldwide, the highest gross yet for a Hollywood Pictures film and one of Disney's most profitable live-action films ever. The following month's release of the Tony Scott action film Crimson Tide also proved to be a smash, grossing $157 million to become one of the biggest action films ever released by Disney. To top it off, the release of Dangerous Minds, a drama starring Michelle Pfeiffer as a schoolteacher who takes a job working with underprivileged students, was a sleeper hit, not only grossing $179 million on a $23 million budget, but producing a triple platinum soundtrack featuring Coolio's #1 Billboard hit, Gangsta's Paradise. Within months, the studio had gone from the brink of failure to having 3 films surpass the $100 million mark, plus a breakout soundtrack with a hit song dominating the music industry. However, 1995 wasn't without its failures. The $90 million Judge Dredd, another Synergy collaboration starring Sylvester Stallone, was a commercial and critical disappointment. And The Scarlet Letter, an adaptation of Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic novel starring Demi Moore as the lead, received 7 Golden Raspberry nominations, developing a reputation as one of the worst films ever made. But the label had achieved enough wins in '95 to offset its losses. The irony is that most of these successful projects had been greenlit under Ricardo Mestrez's leadership, who was pushed out before he could take any credit. Joe Roth's leadership as the Disney Studio chairman was also credited for these wins, as he reportedly authorized big marketing pushes for the films that tested well with preview audiences, while limiting resources for the ones that tested poorly. Late 1995 would see the release of Oliver Stone's presidential biopic Nixon, which was a commercial flop but received 4 Academy Award nominations. Mr. Holland's Opus, the last Hollywood Pictures film released in 1995, achieved both critical and commercial success, garnering several Golden Globe nominations and grossing $100 million worldwide. Through failures and successes during the first half of the 90s, Disney overall was shifting its strategy. Rather than release live-action films with modest budgets, it would focus on more big-budget, star-driven films that would be considered events. 1996's 101 Dalmatians, produced by Ricardo Mestrez and released by Walt Disney Pictures, was one of the first films to tap into this strategy, as it was a live-action reboot of a classic animated film from the Disney Vault. The tie-in with an existing intellectual property meant that the film had a built-in audience, and also opened the door for promotional and merchandising opportunities not possible with the standard live-action film. Joe Roth predicted that event films could generate 2 to 3 times the profits that an ordinary live-action film could, as high revenue from the box office, home video, and merchandise would offset the high marketing costs necessary to promote these large-scale films. Roth's bet was correct, with 101 Dalmatians grossing $320 million worldwide. And the film's success led to Disney releasing more live-action films based on existing properties, to big success. But in chasing big event films, Disney would fall victim to the blockbuster mentality that Katzenberg had warned about years earlier. Blockbusters needed big stars in order to sell, but star salaries had risen considerably over the years, with most big actors now commanding $20 million per film, plus profit participation. Additionally, the industry had embraced high-priced development deals with various talent. A studio would pay millions of dollars to a particular star, director, or producer for a first-look deal to develop any projects that they might create. By 1996, Disney had 40 development deals in place, with everyone from Tim Allen to Oprah Winfrey to Martin Scorsese. Overall, the studio was paying an estimated $50 million a year in overhead costs just to support these deals. While the company's development deal with producer Jerry Bruckheimer had proved to be worth it, with his 1996 Hollywood Pictures film The Rock grossing over $300 million worldwide, the majority of these development deals were not paying off. Despite star power and big-name directors, Hollywood Pictures suffered a number of flops in 1996. These failures, coupled with development deals and other overhead costs, were causing a real strain on the studio, as it lost an estimated $180 million in 1996 despite some big hits. In response, Hollywood Pictures would reduce the size of its workforce, and many in the press were predicting that Hollywood Pictures would be shut down, saying that Disney had failed to establish an identity for its distribution label and was spending too much money on films with minimal appeal. Michael Linton stepped down as the president of Hollywood Pictures around this time, opting to return to the publishing world to head Penguin Group. Linton would be replaced by Walt Disney Pictures president David Vogel, who would expand his duties to oversee both entities. And Disney executives initiated a long-term plan to scale back on overall film production at the studio. 1997 would be even worse for Hollywood Pictures, as they released 8 films with only one, Grosse Pointe Blank, being a modest success due to its minuscule budget. High-profile releases like Shadow Conspiracy, G.I. Jane, and An American Werewolf in Paris failed miserably, as Michael Eisner was urging the studio to cut costs. In response to Eisner's mandate, Joe Roth merged the operations of Hollywood Pictures, Touchstone, and Walt Disney Pictures into a single entity called Buena Vista Motion Picture Group. Hollywood Pictures would cut down its production slate significantly, releasing just 2 to 4 films per year. But even then, the label was unable to churn out any hits. None of the 4 films released in 1998 by Hollywood Pictures achieved any success, and it was looking like the label was about to be phased out. With only 3 films scheduled for release in 1999, down from 15 a year in its peak, Disney had moved on from the goals and strategies which had necessitated the label's creation in the first place. However, Hollywood Pictures' next release would exceed all expectations, growing to become one of Disney's biggest releases ever, yet ultimately leading to the distribution label's death. M. Night Shyamalan was no stranger to the Disney Company. The up-and-coming director had written and directed his first film, the independently released Praying with Anger, in 1992, before releasing Wide Awake through Miramax in 1998. The script for Shyamalan's next film, the psychological thriller The Sixth Sense, caught the eye of David Vogel, who greenlit the film into production through Hollywood Pictures. Bruce Willis, who had starred in Touchstone's blockbuster Armageddon and was under contract for one more film with Disney, chose to star in the film, much to the dismay of studio executives who would have preferred that he stick with the action genre. Released in August of 1999, The Sixth Sense grossed $26 million its opening weekend, setting a record for an August release. And due to strong word of mouth, the film would remain at the #1 spot for 5 weekends in a row, ultimately surpassing $600 million worldwide. The film's critical response was equally impressive, receiving rave reviews along with 6 Academy Award nominations. But more importantly, The Sixth Sense was the kind of cultural phenomena that studios can only dream of achieving, a transcendental film that becomes woven into the collective consciousness of the public.
I see dead people.
After 10 years in existence, Hollywood Pictures had finally produced a film that smashed all expectations, with The Sixth Sense becoming not only the second highest grossing film of the year, but at the time becoming Disney's biggest live-action release ever. But there was one big problem with the success of The Sixth Sense. When the film had been greenlit by David Vogel, studio chairman Joe Roth had very little faith in the film. Pressured by Eisner's directive to cut costs at the studio, Roth had opted to sell the international and domestic rights to The Sixth Sense to Spyglass Entertainment before its release, in order to recoup some of the production costs and lessen the risk. While Disney distributed the film through Buena Vista, it only received a distribution fee of 12.5% of the gross, losing out on the majority of the profits for the film's massive worldwide success. In spite of the fact that Hollywood Pictures had developed and produced Disney's highest-grossing live-action film ever, the label had become increasingly irrelevant to the company. Its next two films in 1999, an adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's Breakfast of Champions and Mystery Alaska from Austin Powers director Jay Roach, both flopped commercially, and the year 2000 saw Hollywood Pictures release two low-profile indie acquisitions, Gunshy and Duets, to little fanfare. Overall, Disney wasn't releasing as many films as it had in the early 90s, and the studio had Touchstone Pictures to release its smaller films, along with Miramax Films, which Disney had acquired in 1993. In 2001, Hollywood Pictures released one final film, Just Visiting, before quietly going defunct. While the label stopped releasing films, the name Hollywood Pictures would occupy an important role at the Disney Company, as they opened a brand new theme park as part of their Disneyland Resort in Anaheim. Disney's California Adventure, which opened in February of 2001, featured a themed land called Hollywood Pictures Backlot, which was inspired by the golden age of Hollywood and attempted to replicate the feeling of a studio backlot. While the park received a mixed public reaction overall, Hollywood Pictures Backlot would retain its name until 2012, when it was renamed Hollywoodland. Hollywood Pictures as a film label would make a surprising return in 2006 with the release of the horror film Stay Alive. Disney did not publicly reveal why they chose to resurrect the label for this particular film, but it appears that their goal was for Hollywood Pictures to become a horror and thriller label, appealing to a young adult audience similar to Dimension Films, which Disney had owned until 2005. But Stay Alive was critically panned and disappointed at the box office. The label's next film, a monster flick entitled Primeval, performed even worse, and after the release of the teen supernatural thriller The Invisible in 2007, Hollywood Pictures was put to rest for good. Around this time, Disney announced that it would be simplifying its branding, renaming Touchstone Television as ABC Television Studio and turning Buena Vista distribution into Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. Disney has since acquired companies like 20th Century Fox, Marvel Studios, and Lucasfilm, moving even further away from the kinds of original, small to mid-budget films that Hollywood Pictures was known for. But there's no doubt that Hollywood Pictures made its mark on the film industry as a whole, producing influential art house films and mass appeal blockbusters alike. Though the hits were few and far between, the label was responsible for launching the careers of several high-profile individuals, and certainly brought more value to the Disney Company by expanding the scope of what Disney was capable of producing. Maybe the label was never destined to succeed, simply being a product of the excesses of its time. But Hollywood Pictures played a pivotal role for the Disney Company during one of its most successful eras, and will always have its place solidified in film history. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon, you can find the link in the description.